Joining me now, the great Texas Senator, Mr. Ted Cruz. Always a pleasure, Senator Ted Cruz. You know, I wasn't going to talk about all this stuff until the Truth Social post on Iran. I want to get your thoughts on that. You heard my riff, sir. Feel free to disagree, but I'm kind of happy he's kind of going after Iran and China with one fell swoop. But how does Senator Cruz see it?
As usual, Larry, I agree with every syllable of every word you said in your opening riff.
Thank you.
And let me follow up and expand a little bit on what you said. As you remember well, in the first Trump term, I was deeply involved in the fight to impose maximum pressure on Iran. And President Trump, the most important national security decision he made his first term was pulling out of the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. I probably spent 24 meetings with him in the Oval Office making the case for that. He agreed with me. He did that. But the follow-up to that, after we pulled out of the disastrous Obama-Iran nuclear deal, there remained in place an oil waiver where Iran was allowed to sell oil, and they were selling roughly 1 million barrels a day of oil. At that point, you'll remember there was a fight within the Trump administration between the State Department and the Energy Department. The State Department said that if we ended the oil waiver, it would cause the global price of oil to skyrocket and the price of gasoline here at home to skyrocket. The Department of Energy, which you might think would know something about energy, said that's nonsense. There's plenty of global supply of oil. We can end the waiver without materially impacting the price of oil. I weighed in again aggressively and said end the oil waiver. The president agreed with me. And we now know that energy was right and state was wrong. Iran's oil sales fell from 1 million barrels a day down to 300,000 barrels a day. And the price of oil didn't move at all. Right. It had essentially no impact on the global price of oil. When Joe Biden came into office, he inherited an Iranian regime. The economy was in free fall. The regime was teetering. And when he came into office, they were selling 300,000 barrels of oil a day. Biden immediately stopped enforcing the oil sanctions, and the Iranian oil sales skyrocketed from 300,000 barrels a day to about 2 million barrels a day. And as you rightly noted, in a very real sense, the Biden administration, by refusing to enforce sanctions, flowed $100 billion to the Ayatollah and in a very direct way funded October 7th and Hamas and Hezbollah by providing the principal source of revenue to the regime. So President Trump is exactly right, going back and saying we're going back to maximum pressure. We're going to cut off the money and we're going to cut off the funds that are funding the terrorists.
You know, I should have put that in the riff. That's precisely what you said. Biden actually lifted the sanctions on Iranian oil sales. He actually lifted them, which, of course, lifted the maximum pressure that Mr. Trump had on this. Now, the second part of this is, of course, the China card.
Yes.
And I know, Mr. Trump is saying he'd like to do some business with China regarding the tariffs, which are, whatever they are, 145% on Chinese, anything we import from China. Okay, we'd all like to get these tariffs down. The goal here is to freer trade. And I think that's Mr. Trump's goal, end unfair trading practices. But in this particular situation, I don't know. I mean, to me, going after Iran and telling China, you're basically putting the wood to China on this.
Yeah.
And I think that has to supersede trade deals and contacts. And anyway, China breaks a trade deal that I helped negotiate, blood, sweat, and tears, Bob Lighthizer, Steve Mnuchin. We did that phase 1 thing back, signed it in January 2020. They broke that, too. So I'm not going to shed any tears for China on any count, Senator, on any count. Oil, Iran, trade deals, they're helping to finance the worst elements of society around the world. That's what they're doing. And so they've got to be taken to the woodshed.
Look, I have been urging President Trump on trade, focus on China. And I think every step we can take to de-link our economy from China is good for American national security and good for American economic security. And so I'm very glad the president laid out the pause where he halted the tariffs on the other countries and focused on China. I think that was the right decision to do. I don't think the Iranian oil is going to be an issue. Whatever happens with China and President Trump, look, when we had maximum pressure before, the Iranian oil, we saw their sales plummet, and it was not a big problem for China. China can stop buying this oil. And critically, with the rest of the tariffs, listen, I think the Trump administration has a real fork in the road. They can either go down the road of using the incredible leverage that President Trump has to negotiate much lower tariffs from our trading partners. That's the right path, as you said. That would be a massive economic victory for America, an historic victory for President Trump. The other path they could go down, and there are some voices in the administration that want this second path, is to have high tariffs forever in perpetuity. I think that would be a real mistake and do real damage. So from my end, I am urging President Trump, go down path number one, and it will be truly an historic victory for American workers and American jobs.
Well, I'm back on the same page with you on that one, too, Senator. 100%. No, I agree. I know who the negative voices are, but I think they're already losing. And I think the president himself is using his good common sense as a deal maker and as a great president. He sees what to do. I could talk to you all day, but I can't. But I want a couple of other quick things I want to talk to you about.
Sure.
I want to go back to the reconciliation bill, sir. Before I get to the tax cuts, and I know you've got an IRA proposal you want to talk about, we need to cut spending, right? We know that. And, Newt Gingrich has been on the show. Last night, in fact, Newt was on the show. And Newt and I have talked a lot about this. Some Republicans are squeamish about slowing the growth of Medicaid, but they shouldn't be. I mean, Medicaid spending has gone up 51% since 2019. Kim Strassel's got that in her column today, again, as if we needed to be reminded of. And even with waste, fraud, and abuse and some tightening up of eligibility, for example, able-bodied people should not get Medicaid, you'd still be increasing Medicaid by an enormous amount of money, by about $235 billion in this budget window, instead of increasing it by another $500 or $600 billion. But we'd still be increasing it by a couple of $100 billion. That should be enough. It's still growing, but it's just not growing as topsy as before. Can Medicaid, relief get in the reconciliation bill, Senator Cruz?
I believe it can. I believe it will. We've got to rein in spending, particularly coming out of COVID. Joe Biden, the Democrats, spent like drunken sailors. We saw the federal budget, the deficit and debt skyrocket. We got to rein it in because we're bankrupting our kids and grandkids. And if you look at Medicaid, there is massive waste, fraud, and abuse. You look at the current system right now. Obamacare incentivized states to spend a lot more money on young, healthy adults than they spend on children and than they spend on really vulnerable seniors. Medicaid was designed to help the most vulnerable, not a 25-year-old guy with no kids who's perfectly healthy, who is not right now working. I think one of the most important things we need to do is for young, healthy adults, put in a work requirement to Medicaid. You look at the effect of that, that is incredibly beneficial, getting people back to work, and that changes people's entire trajectories, entire lives. I think we've got an enormous opportunity to do that right now in reconciliation.
The original mandate, Senator, low-income families, children, people with disabilities, not able-bodied, but people with disabilities and pregnant women. So if we return to the eligibility mandates that were first put in, we save a couple $100 billion minimum. So you're right, spot on that. Tell me about your IRA proposal, sir, and tell me that we're going to get all the Trump tax cuts extended, and we're going to get 2.0. We're going to get the tax-free tips for service workers and overtime and senior Social Security benefits. Tell me it's all going to come true.
So, look, we're going to get it done. You remember well in 2017, tax reform is messy. There are a million trade-offs. There are trade-offs between big companies and little companies and C-corps and S-corps and partnerships and families and individuals. There are trade-offs between red states and blue states and rural and urban and suburban, and that just takes time. And so there's going to be in 2017, I spent hundreds of hours negotiating the first Trump tax cuts. We're going to have to go through that here as well. But we will get it done, because if we don't act, there's an automatic $4 trillion tax increase. That is unacceptable. So we're going to extend the Trump tax cuts. We're going to pass no taxes on tips. It's my legislation in the Senate, no taxes on tips. We're going to get that done. And I think there are also enormous opportunities. So two of the things I am pressing to do are on school choice. I have legislation that creates a federal tax credit for contributions to scholarship granting organizations in the states.
Real quick,
we have
sir.
an opportunity to do the most significant school choice bill in history, and also to help people save tax-free with a universal savings account. I hope we do that as well.
I love the universal savings account. Make the thing simplified, for heaven's sakes. There's so many of these things. I love that. You're on a roll, Senator Cruz. Honestly, you're on a complete tear. Thank you very much for all your wisdom.
Thank you, Larry.
We appreciate it.